Yes, I can hear you,
Yeah.
and sorry for not being there. Et je comprends français, en effet, je parle assez bien français, mais pas assez bon pour cette conversation, donc si on peut continuer en anglais, je suis content. So let's continue in English, but thanks for the nice introduction.
Sure. Actually, your French is way much better than my Swedish. So we'll start. In 2009, you wrote an article which was a worldwide, I don't know if we say blockbuster, but actually who made a huge block in the scientific community about the 9 boundaries. So basically what you are saying is that we have 9 boundaries not to cross if we want the Earth planet to go on for very long. And in 2015, this year, you made a new version of this article, and this highlights the fact that 4 of these boundaries are actually overwhelmed. So could you explain us, maybe not the 9, but could you explain this boundary story?
Yes, thank you. And let me start, which I think is important, just for you all to recognize the robustness upon which this analysis stands. So the starting point for trying to define a safe operating space for humanity on Earth by identifying and quantifying safe boundaries starts with 3 strands of science that have advanced in just a tremendous way over the past 30 years. And the first is the science showing clearly from empirical evidence that we've entered the Anthropocene. We're in a new geological epoch where we humans are the largest driver of change at the planetary scale. And this is the exponential pressure showing that we're hitting the ceiling of Earth's capacity to support humanity. In very simple terms, we have just over the past 30 years transitioned from being a relatively small world on a large planet to now being a relatively large world on a small planet. So that's a big shift. The second strand of science, which is at the core of the planet boundary research, is resilience, is the recognition that we have so much evidence today that systems from the oceans to the polar regions to rainforests have tipping points, meaning that if we push them too far, at a certain non-negotiable, hardwired biophysical point, the systems, because of changes in feedbacks, flip over from a desired stable state to an undesired, irreversible change away from a state that can support our world development. And the third and final piece of evidence that forms the basis of the planet boundary framework is, of course, the biggest question of all. Can we identify the desired state of the planet? And we can. So from glaciological data, from tremendous amount of work over the past 30 years, we can now say for certain that the Holocene, the past 12,000 years of a warm, stable, interglacial, is our desired state. I sometimes say it's the Eden's garden for human development. It's an extraordinarily stable period where temperatures have stayed, for example, variable within a narrow range of plus minus 1 degree Celsius. And if you package this together, exponential pressures, catastrophic tipping points is a real part, an integral part of the planet, and that the Holocene is our desired state. If you take these 3 together, out comes planetary boundaries. Because of course, the question then becomes, can we, if we know that the Holocene is our desired state, can we answer 2 questions? One is, what are the environmental processes that regulates the ability of the Earth system to stay in a desired equilibrium state of the Holocene? And secondly, can we, for each of these processes, scientifically identify quantitative boundaries beyond which we enter this terrain of tipping points? And we went to a large search. Actually, in 2006, 2007, 2008, we gathered the world leading Earth system scientists, from Nobel laureate Paul Crutzen on the ozone layer to the top climate scientists, the top biodiversity scientists, and really scanned off the science. And we came to the conclusion that 9 systems determine the ability of the Earth system to stay stable. And these include, very rapidly, of course, the climate system, the stratospheric ozone layer, the oceans, but also, a bit more surprisingly perhaps, biodiversity, land use, fresh water, and nutrients, how we interfere with the nitrogen and phosphorus cycles. And then 2 final alien processes, which is chemical pollution and the big issue around air pollution and aerosol loading. And then we even proposed quantifications for 7 of the 9. We felt science could do that. And we challenged science across the world to criticize this and to improve. And we said, perhaps we've missed something. There might be a 10th one. Or perhaps we've got 1 too many. There might be just 8. And the surprising and very satisfying result after 5 years of extraordinary scientific scrutiny, we land in 2015 with the same 9 and with even more improved updates on quantification. So I would argue today that we stand on more solid ground than ever, that we do actually have a relatively good sense of the 9 processes that regulates Earth's stability, and that we have quite a good precision today of defining a safe operating space within which humanity then can develop and hopefully even thrive.
Okay, so now that we have a better map of these 9 boundaries, could you tell us what we should do differently in order not to overpass them? And since you spoke a lot about measure, and we have a problem measuring the stuff, could you tell us what we should measure? Because we know that actually all the economic leaders in the world and all the politician leaders are driven by the GDP, and we know that the GDP doesn't take in consideration the economic standards. So how should we measure in the future?
Yeah, so on the first part of your question, how does this change things? I would like to support Naomi Klein and her recent book, This Changes Everything, because adopting a planetary boundary approach changes everything. And remember again, the framework emerges right at this critical juncture when we are saturating the entire planetary system. So how does it change everything? Well, when you think of it, today we have an economic paradigm which assumes that we can have infinite growth on a finite planet. It's simply built on the notion that we are a small world on a big planet. It simply builds on the notion that we can take for free on natural capital, climate space, and raw materials, and add value to it, consume, produce, and then waste without having invoices coming back to the economy. And Planetary Boundaries does the reverse. It says there are finite budgets within which we need to operate. So for example, for climate, the climate boundary translates itself to a global carbon budget, which then needs to be shared in a fair way among all nations in the world. So already there, the need to put value on capital, natural capital, is absolutely necessary. But the most dramatic thing is the following. You know, the economic system is built on the assumption that you never have surprise. It simply builds on the assumption that you can do cost-benefit analysis and you put your interest rates or discount rates on the assumption that there are no catastrophic tipping points. If there are tipping points, such as irreversible change of the Greenland ice sheet, you end up with infinite social costs if you cross tipping points, which means that economic theory collapses. So there's something profound of navigating within a safe operating space. Now, what does it mean for measurement? Well, it means, to begin with, we simply have to recognize, which many scholars have done in the past, like Joe Stiglitz and other Nobel laureates, that GDP is simply an obsolete measure for progress towards delivering on human well-being for 2 reasons. I mean, one is the simple fact that even if we didn't have catastrophic risks of change, GDP simply omits many of the key qualities that we value as quality of life. But most importantly, GDP takes us down a path that leads to the high risk of massive unexpected invoices coming back to the economy. And we're starting to see that happen already today. I mean, remember that 4 years before the Syrian war erupted, we had the worst drought in 8,000 years, which in turn was preceded by the Arabic Spring, which in turn was also propelled by a quick crisis on food prices in the world market, which was related to climate change, which stopped export of food from Australia and Russia. So we're starting to see these impacts. So I would argue that we need to, quite fundamentally rethink macroeconomics in the way of really trying to recognize the need to regulate the guardrails or boundaries within which the economy operates.
And one more question, because we're, like the planet, we are running out of time, but about responsibilities. Yesterday here, Jacques Attali, the founder of the Positive Economy Forum, said that the politicians are overwhelmed by the responsibility on climate issues. And so we're trying to deal with responsibilities for the companies, for the people, for the politician. On the other hand, you think only politicians have the ability to react because the path of climate change is so fast that only a political global change could come. Could you explain that?
Yeah, so this is often leading to a dichotomy or a misunderstanding that it seems to be today that either you're for bottom-up innovation processes that grow organically, or you're so to say seen to be a top-down regulating or governance proponent. And I would argue you need to think about both at the same time. So the magnitude and pace of the transformation we need to do to take us back in a safe operating space, because as you pointed out, we are in a danger zone on climate change, on biodiversity, on forest or deforestation and land use, and on eutrophication, requires that 200 countries move very decisively in the same direction. I cannot see any other solution than that we have strengthened governance and policy decisions at the global scale. For example, locking ourselves to a 2-degree target, putting a price on carbon, and locking ourselves to very hard targets on essentially reaching zero emissions by 2050, 2060 in the world, and have enforcement around those. But that is not in contradiction to bottom-up entrepreneurs and communities innovating in a safe operating space. I think the reverse. If you regulate very sharply from above, I think that will be an even stronger incentive for innovation and transformation from the bottom up. What I hear from business leaders today is they say, we want more regulation so that we can actually know what are the requirements for our businesses in the future. So I don't see a contradiction between the two, essentially.
Well, thank you very much, Johan. We'll let you go to your next appointment, and thanks very much for making this possible today. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, and good luck with your conference. Bye, everyone.
Bye.